Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Joel Elston here. Today is Thursday, January 25th, 2018, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, your first daily dose of happy for the day. And Joel, good to be back talking with you again. We only get to do it once a week, but every week we make a really good deal of it because it's always fun. So I hope you're enjoying it too.
Absolutely. As I say every week, I look forward to this day, and it helps me, I think, as much as to share, but I get the feedback from you. It's amazing. I love it every week.
Yeah, I have to admit that's one of the reasons I do the show. Actually, the main reason I do the show. I just love it. It's so much fun to do, and it gets me going. But we also have things going on in our lives every day that are also good. I mean, like you were saying before the show, everything is good. But you had one really, really good thing yesterday. You had a very unusual event. You want to tell people about it?
Well, yeah, I was contacted through actually the attorney, as many of you know, that I had adopted a young man from foster care back in December. He had been in foster care with me for over a year, and my attorney actually does a show called Above the Bar, and it is a radio show done weekly, and it just talks about various legal situations, but she's also an advocate for adoption from foster care. So she had this concept of I think the name of her show was Single Dads by Choice. And, you know, people that we're not not a lot of people, single males adopting children from foster care is exactly not your normal
not really,
situation. So it created, she wanted to get into that. Well, it opened the door to, at first I was going to be one of three people on the show, and then it just eventually ended up with just me and her, just basically me as the guest. And it really, if anything, we didn't have near enough time, and it allowed not just talking about adoption from foster care, I think, which we advocated very well, but it also talked about law of attraction. It talked about, concepts of how to apply the law of attraction to dealing with foster care kids. And there's so many things that came out of the show in a very good way. And I didn't, well, I knew it was a good show, and it's local AM radio. So you weren't, I think like 9 people picked that up, all over the air. So, but the posting it on Facebook and then eventually on YouTube and the other things that transpire after that, I just had tons of messages of people, and while it was going on, as you know, I talk about my son TJ a lot, and I don't know why. I mean, I use his name frequently in talks, and I lost him to a car accident a few years ago, and but I don't know why yesterday in particular. I guess I was so into the topic, but when I was describing his situation and what happened when he passed away, I got choked up, and for some reason that moment, I probably heard from 50 people saying that they just literally lost it at that moment.
Wow. And
it really had a deep connection with them. And, it certainly wasn't something that I had planned, but it turned out as everything I do that I try to do in my life, I turned that into a positive. We really touched some people yesterday and got some great points about several things across there.
That's fantastic. I mean, you got to touch on law of attraction. You had that really great moment, and you managed to reach 50 people when only 9 are listening. I thought that was pretty good too.
Yeah, it really was. And so, they have the number of views on Facebook and on the Facebook Live post, and last I looked, it like 700 or 800 people viewed it in one day. So that's again, it's not about me, and it's about the ability to get this message out. It's such an amazing thing. The law of attraction. Beforehand, I was talking to the general manager of the radio station, and he wants to talk to me about talking to him about law of attraction and just how it was in radio is a business that a traditional radio. I imagine it's a difficult way to make a living now.
Yeah.
Just some of the concepts that may be applicable to the law of attraction in his situation. So the message yesterday was shared and picked up, and I love anytime we can. We do this every week, and our listenership is growing at a huge rate. This message of the law of attraction. As you know, I'm doing metaphysics studies beyond the law of attraction, which I think the law of attraction is sort of the cornerstone of that study. And I really think that this is growing at a great rate, and everybody that hears the message really resonates with it, and it applies to everyone. And I replied to a Facebook post you had yesterday about your show, where you say you hide from the law of attraction. So yeah, you can hide, but it won't work, but you can hide. It's operating no more than you can, as I think we use this analogy weekly, no more than you can hide from the law of gravity. The law of attraction is taking place.
Yep, very true. I also love the post that you posted earlier in the week about how your study of metaphysics toward the doctorate you're pursuing was giving you a headache, and I can understand that because I think you were looking at entanglement theory. Is that what it was?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Entanglement theory is, I mean, I actually didn't really know a whole lot about it. I mean, I have some familiarity with quantum physics, but, kind of more on the lay version of it rather than the in-depth scientific version. But I did do some reading after you posted about that, and I said, oh my God, this is like, wow, this is like trying to fit a needle through a haystack and trying to figure out where the haystack is and where the needle is. It's just crazy. There are just so many pieces to it.
There's so many versions and so many potential possibilities of what and the reason that I jokingly said it gave me a headache is that, as you know, this overall topic excites me. I believe we know far less then we haven't even begun it. I've told you before that I think we, as far as the law of attraction goes, I think we moved from kindergarten to first grade to maybe second grade. But now that I'm looking at metaphysics, I think I'm preschool again. It's fascinating, and there's so many, and there's so many theories that actually match, but they're polar opposites. So, I mean, you're just trying to figure it all out. And, you have string theory, you have the concept of multiple universes, and the one constant that everything pivots off of is sort of the law of attraction. What, the in-depth, what you think has energy, and that's what you attract. Mm-hmm. Within that, it matches a bunch of, the theories, no matter which way you go. That's sort of the main, the main pivot point where everything comes off of. So that's a big reinforcer to me is the law of attraction within all that, within quantum physics, or, no matter where we're going, it always has some component of the law of attraction where, the energy that attracts, and we were, I listened to a lecture last night on, is it coincidence? Or is it synchronicity? There's tons of stories of brief example of a person who, young ladies at a ballpark up in, somewhere in New England. And, she actually didn't have to go to work that day, was supposed to be at work, got called out. She went to watch her nephew play a baseball game, and a kid was hit. She's a nurse, and there's a kid that was hit in the chest with a baseball bat. That the timing was perfect. His heart stopped. She happened to witness it, and she gave him CPR and saved his life. That's not remarkable. That happens. However, 7 years later, she's in a restaurant choking, and the bus boy runs over and gives her the Heimlich maneuver and saves her life. Turns out to be the same kid she saved.
Wow.
The previous time, and he wasn't supposed to be at work. He got called in at the last minute as well.
Wow.
And there's countless. We all have those in our life. So the concept of how that works with the law of attraction and and how it all comes together, it just excites me in a great deal. That there's so much we don't know, and traditional science has ruled out so much of this stuff. But now it's coming full circle as we have more as we're seeing it all through a pattern. You're getting more and more believers.
By the way, we also have it here in the show because you listened to a lecture about synchronicity and coincidence, and you'll never guess what the topic of the show was that Wendy and I did on Monday. Synchronicity and coincidence.
Really?
I'm swear to God, it really was. You can look it up. It's on the blog. It's on the website. So there's another example of it right there. But, so anyway, we have a guest joining us today who is a mompreneur. I have to admit, I'd never heard that term before, but it's pretty obvious what it means. A mom who's also an entrepreneur. It's a pretty cool term. And in fact, there's even a website and an organization that supports and nourishes women who want to be mompreneurs. And so she has her own business, and she's been doing a lot of things in her life. I won't even try to list them. She may touch on some of them in the conversation. But she's come on board here today to talk to us about a topic that many parents deal with, which is when they get the teenagers and the kids reach the teenage years, things start to change, and situations become difficult. Kids are going through that different time of life, and they're going through personal changes, and it can lead to what she calls teenagers throwing daggers, which is kind of a funny way to look at it. But that's really, in one sense, what can happen. So now, in addition, and her name is Stacey Aarssen. Stacey is a co-author of the book that we're writing on Your Daily Dose of Happy. So there are a lot of ties going on here. So first of all, Stacey, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thanks so much, Walt. It's a real pleasure, actually, to hang out with you two this morning.
Now, you got to give me a little bit of background on the highlights, the top highlights. I know you're a mompreneur, but what precisely have you done there that's like the most interesting and exciting part from your perspective?
When I think back on my life and what has transpired, I am a mom of 3 grown daughters. I've been with my husband for 31 years, and we lived in a town that's a small town. We both worked for our parents. And then back in 2004, both our parents' businesses who we worked for, one closed and one sold. And so through that transition, we moved to a new town, picked up our kids, started roots in a new area, and basically jumped off a cliff together in starting a business in a cold market where we had didn't know anybody. So, and through that, we've built that up and raised these amazing daughters. And you talk about the law of attraction, and I know we moved to this area just so they could flourish, the 3 of them. So that's a bit about me. Financial, I'm actually launching a new business as well. It's funny how things come back around, and since 2005, I've been a financial advisor, helping people figure out how they can retire and if they're covered for enough insurance and things like that. And my family business was in retail clothing, which we dressed people in the small town, and it's been kind of knocking at my door, so to speak. That little message that you get in your gut, and I've been drawn back into. Actually, I've done a course, and I'm working with people on image consulting and helping them be the best they can be. So I'm just launching that as well.
All right. And when we talked about having you on the program, you actually came up with 3 different topics. This was the first one that you mentioned on your list as a potential topic. I'm wondering what motivated this topic? What made you think of it?
Well, you two were just talking about the law of attraction, and you know how when you meet someone, I listened to this woman, her name's Siobhan Boysen, and I was at iNetwork. I'm a really good connector as well, and I'm at this event, and this woman, she just touched my heart, and it's like, I got to meet this woman. And it took about 9 months of connecting, and she was busy, whatever. I ended up meeting her. She writes, editor of a magazine called Motivated Magazine, and she's like interviewed Brent Wilson and Sir Richard Bronson and people like that. And she told me, she actually was one of my great teachers, I guess mentors, and she talked about love. And she says, no matter what, it's all about love. And I says, well, give me an example. And she says, so there's a month that she didn't have her assistant to help get these her magazines out. And prior to that, every month when she would send out her magazines, she put intentional love to, so every reader would feel this love that she intentionally sent to all the readers. And this month, because she was doing it on her own, she forgot to do that step. That was the month that she didn't get any responses. Hey, I love your magazine. You know, all the people that give great feedback. She didn't get any of that. And it was a really great exercise that she realized that with everything intention that you send love. So that got me thinking too. At the time, my daughter, who was in Canada, it's grade 10, so she was like about 16. And she's the youngest of 3 daughters, and suffered from, I think, a bit of depression, rebellion, and she's very angry with life. And it's like, Siobhan came into my life to teach me something, and it's like, okay, so she's throwing these, when I say daggers, it's mostly like verbal, you know, how they get screaming and slam the door and things like that, right? And it's like, I need to help this child in whatever way I could, and I started intentionally sending love. When she would send these verbal whatever, or angry or sad, or I just started sending love, continually sending love, and it takes time, and it's actually, it's more work than you think, because when they're upset or whatever, and you're trying to be calm and send love back, it's not the easiest task. But intentionally I did that, and it took a couple of years, and slowly I saw this child transform into this beautiful child. Actually, she just moved out. She's 22 now, and because of what my work that I've been doing with myself since probably about 2005 on this same thought of law of attraction and love, she has practiced this herself, and I can even, like, I'll in my actually story that I'm putting into your book, I'm actually going to share part of her story, but she is this beautiful child that graduated. She's a massage therapist, met the love of her life, but it's all through power of love and sending love back, and not arguing with them. And you still have to set the boundaries and things like that, but I saw the most transition with this kid.
Okay. And one of the reasons I was intrigued by this is you have daughters. Joel raises sons that he's adopted. So, Joel, I'm wondering, is it all that much different with boys than it is with girls?
No, I have pretty much, I would imagine it's pretty much the same thing as, my kids, my boys being adopted from foster care. Not that it's a comparison, but they have an additional layer of, obvious stuff that happened and coming from incredibly difficult backgrounds. But, I mentioned this on the radio show yesterday, and I completely agree with everything that's being talked about. We have a tendency, I have a tendency, and I'll speak clearly with me, I have a tendency to simply get stuck on, the emotionality of moments. When you're dealing with your kid, anger is always, in my world, anger is a mask of fear. And when you're arguing with your kids, or your kids are escalating, there's really an underlying fear that, boy, this is, my kid's messed up, or I'm not. So your response often will click to anger. And when you get into that battle with them, it really never works. And when you love them, and of course we use the term love them unconditionally, but even, that concept of active love, that putting the love out there, is such an effective tool. I know, I use TJ, TJ is the one that passed away, and he was such a wild child, and in the beginning he had so much anger, and he did everything possible, his daggers and his acting out, he did everything he could to make me kick him out, make him get rid of him, like everybody else had done. So, when I speak often of one of the great lessons I learned as a parent. Somebody told me pretty early, when I was sort of getting wound up about that, a guru of mine said, "Joel, it's not about you." And I don't know why that one statement changed everything, because the moment that I heard that it wasn't about me, and I knew it, but I'm like, okay, that's not about me. That is about my son, and so what is the most effective way to help him? And it isn't to battle him like everyone else has come up with something different. I use humor a lot, and not everybody can really appreciate that, especially in moments of great, of great stress. And it worked really well with TJ. And one of the stories I talk about to people, parenting groups at times, this doesn't apply to every kid. You got to know your kid before this works. But TJ one day was upset about something, and he was supposed to go visit his biological uncle. At the last minute, he canceled. That just reinforced the abandonment issue. So TJ was screaming about me about something like I didn't have Pop-Tarts or something, just something benign, and he was just so angry. He said, and you're the worst effing dad ever. Well, I've been preparing for that statement for a long time because he's used it before, but I was prepared. So I had saved this article from like the early 80s about this guy in Chicago that boiled his children and ate them.
Oof.
And so I showed it to TJ, and I said, I might be the second worst parent, but this guy really beats me for being the worst. Well, and now again, that's not, doesn't work with every kid, but he immediately de-escalated. Then he was trying not to laugh, and he goes, "What are you talking?" He says, "You're crazy." He said, "What are you talking?" And so he ended up. I said, "Buddy, what you're upset about is you're not mad at me and no Pop-Tarts. You're mad at me because I love you and I can give you the love back, and really your family is disappointing you once again." And he was able to talk about that, and I used I used a deflection from that. So even though that using that example doesn't necessarily sound like sending love, it's what resonated with TJ, that I could help break him out of where that was at, and it was all based in love and what he's been through. And on the same token, not this is a really good point too. There are boundaries, and there are. He can't use his past as an excuse to get outside the boundaries. So by keeping our boundaries where they needed to be, but at the same time giving him unconditional love, is what eventually, and over a period of years, is what turned TJ's life around.
So that sounds pretty familiar to you, Stacey, based on what you're talking about.
Well, definitely, and I think it really resonates on. Well, the humor is a great thing, and I want to add though that the humor didn't exactly work with Megan. It would have worked with my oldest child, Chantal, but John, my husband, got great humor, and it got to the point where he couldn't even talk to her. He couldn't even say hello, and it would be like she would just lash out and be angry. And I finally had to say to John, just shut up. Just don't talk to her until just let it needs to shift, because there's something because he is very humorous, so he would make light on things. And for example, if she couldn't find her car keys, and he would say, "Well, if you put them, where we have our little box to put all the keys," and then she would just lash out. So I just said, stop. Just wait until she is ready to talk. And when he started just quieting up a bit, her whole mood changed. Because when I'm also, what came to me is, what's on the news today with the suicide and everything. And, I think I was a little bit more softer on her than the other two, because I knew she suffered from depression, and I had feelings that there was something else going on. And she even shared like about a year ago, that she did have suicidal thoughts. So, it's that touchy, where do you set the boundaries, and where do you send love? And it needs to be really, I guess, with glass flippers type of thing,
Sure.
Absolutely. I think the point you mentioned that I pick up so much on is knowing your kids, knowing what works with your kids, and where humor may work with your I believe your older child, it doesn't work, especially when that they feel that the humor is being in some way used as a tool to, I've seen that a lot. And so the idea that knowing your kids, knowing the difference, and knowing sometimes the best response is absolutely nothing. Sometimes and you have to know that. I know with my son, Chris, my middle son, Chris, who he doesn't have the ability, if I'm kidding with him or we're joking, he didn't have the ability to turn that off. He wasn't able to, it was just like, okay, if I told him a joke or we did something funny and we laughed, then at bedtime, and then everything's still a joke. And then no matter what, it's a joke. It's like, no, son, you got to know there's a switch. I had literally get to the point with him and say, okay, click, the switch has been turned. We're not laughing. It's not funny. It's time he just didn't have that ability to use that humor. So, I mean, it wasn't a good technique with him either. So every child's different, everyone. And when you're dealing with depression and dealing with those issues, it's such a slippery slope and I often say that, we don't know that much about depression. And despite, if you go see a psychiatrist and you start talking about depression, they often will talk about medications that are unproven, especially in children's brains. And so it is something that as a parent, if you can use that intuitive love that you use so successfully and knowing your child and knowing that you were walking here and you had to be on a more glass slipper approach with her than the other. And some respond differently, and that becomes the key. We really get in trouble with our kids when we believe there's one size fits all answers to all these questions.
Exactly. And that's what, and when you're the older ones are looking, well, how come you're doing so much for her? And even others, it's like, oh my God, you do so much for this kid. But when you just nailed it, intuitive love, there was something. Well, I do have a really strong intuition, and I was picking up on this, and it's like all I felt from as a parent is I just need to get her to adulthood. She progressed at it seemed like a slower rate in feeling, I guess, sure, confidence, and I just knew if I just give this intuitive love long enough, there will be a switch that will kick and then she'll be okay. And, that switch clicked about a year ago from that, just a year ago. She's 22. And it was like, well, maybe it was 2 years ago because when she started into her course with massage therapy, and it was like, oh my God, I can see this transition. And if parents are listening, it's like, you just patience, don't kick them out, like you said, no, give love,
Well, and we're parents. I work with a lot. My practice, I work a lot with addiction, young people with addiction, and a lot of times the traditional model of kick them out and make them suffer and I'm not saying there isn't a role for that when people get into the end-stage addiction. You have to take shocking measures to save lives sometimes. But I know people that, I have a young man that his father called, 16 years old, straight A student. They found pot in his house. And he wanted to check with me because he called a treatment center that was about to take him for a 30-day stint of a $40,000 cost of treatment. And I'm like, you found pot? Man, it's not, nobody's dying here. Let's take a deep breath. And I said, when you send him to a residential treatment facility, I said, he's going to be around heroin addicts. He's going to be around other. So it isn't going to, the odds of it not turning out well are much greater. And forcing something, let's start at a different place. And we met with a kid and we, instead of making an adversarial attack, we came up with a team plan that the kid wrote. And he said, look, if I'm going to stop the pot, whether I'm not going to argue with it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm 16 and it's illegal. That's all that matters. So I'm going to start with that. And we agreed that at 6 months, if he's able to stay clean, then the situation is done. If he's not able to, then as a team, we'll decide what that next step will be instead of an adversarial intervention, which never turns out well. So again, it's this concept of our love in an intuitive sense going out there and sort of matching your kid. Like I use that extreme example with TJ of humor and that. Now, I couldn't use that same technique with Chris. He's a much different, much more sensitive kid. It just would have been an entirely different thing. But with each child, the techniques that apply become obvious, and there is an intuition. And when we stop making it about ourselves, and again, that information of parenting, that's what I have a book coming out about parenting for addicts, and the title is not about you. And once you understand that, then you're able to unconditionally go to your child and give them that love and support, and without the filter of how it's affecting me. And most people don't realize that. And that's exactly what you did with your daughter. And you said, look, I have to intentionally love her. And that initial reaction from her is probably going to be ungodly bad in the beginning. But eventually, that's where that law of attraction can come in. You're only capable of putting out that emotion. She eventually got to the point that she could absorb it and then return it back.
And by the way, for people who are finding this to be highly resonant in themselves because they've also either been dealing with or have in the past dealt with teenagers who are going through a difficult time, well, if this program is resonating with you and you're enjoying it, because we're also trying to insert some humor in all of this, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Subscribe to the podcast. Don't just listen to the one program, and share it with friends too, because we're finding that when people subscribe, they're not just subscribing and listening to 1 or 2 episodes, they're subscribing and listening to 20 to 25 episodes a month, and they're staying as ongoing subscribers, and that really means that we're hitting a nerve. So we want more and more people to find out about it, and you'll be doing your friends a great favor when you share the information. So please share the information. Speaking of which, Stacey, when you're talking about friends with teenagers, that can also create interesting issues, isn't it? Because that could be where the teenager is kind of trying to find a way to get out from under the thumb, so to speak, and when that happens, all kinds of stuff can bubble up to the surface.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's rebellion, and they don't want to listen, and it's like, oh, what are you telling me to do this for? It's not, But I really agree with Joel. It's not about you. I listened to a speaker about a month ago, and the main theme was he learned from a long time ago in dealing with his employees, with everyone. It's not about me. And it's funny, my husband wrote it on our mirror with one of those markers. It's not about me. And wow. it's that in itself is such an amazing tool when somebody's lashing out and you listen to them and it's like, this isn't about me, right? It's so powerful.
It is the answer to, when I'm talking to, if that's before, when I'm talking to employees or I'm talking to whoever, and when somebody is coming at you and your perception, when you get on the defensive, and that's where all this stuff escalates. At the end of the day, I'm driving down the road the other day, and this lady was just, I just sensed, because she was in and out of traffic, and you could just tell she's running late. And so I just backed off and said, instead of getting in a battle of not letting her cut in, just let her go. It doesn't slow me down at all. And I remember, because at first it felt like, oh, she cut me off on purpose. And I was like, and then I immediately went to, this isn't about me. It's about her and her current situation. I have no idea what she was going through. I was fearful that she was going to, run into and hurt somebody, because she was so desperate, obviously, to get where she was going, and was driving irrationally. But all I could do was say, this has nothing to do with me. So let's just let her go on her way. And it applies to so many situations throughout the day that I ask that question often when people are frantic about things, saying, right in that, almost that same vein, well, how much of this is in your control, and how much this is really about you? And once you apply that sort of that measure, everything gets a lot easier. And like Walt, we were talking right before the show started about wins and stuff like that. At the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, in a sense, I woke up today. That is a huge win. That is about me. I woke up. I've been given this opportunity. Absolutely. And with everything that takes place today, if I get stuck in the minutia of the stuff that's out there, I can have a horrible day. Or if I get excited about I look at the grand, just the grand scheme, all the amazing things that are happened, that my kids are thriving, that, Justin's doing so well. Let's look at the positives. And when you do focus and make that part about you, what the part that Stacey so successfully used was the part that was about her. My love for my child is about me and her. So I'm able to focus that toward her. And when I quit, and excuse the term, but it's so relevant here, don't get in pissing contests with your kids. It isn't that you can win or lose. It's not the point. It's when my love's unconditional, and me being right or wrong is irrelevant here. If my child is going to thrive and it requires me to be wrong every day of my life, I will be wrong all the time. The point of me being a parent is to help my children thrive. And whatever that takes is a necessary event. And I don't want to get caught up in the right and wrong game with that.
In your example of the erratic driver, you talked about how you didn't want to engage the driver. I am so far away from wanting to engage. I literally will pull back like 500 yards because I figure that person's going to hit something, and I don't want to be anywhere near it when it happens. So, like, okay, you go right ahead, have fun. I'm done with it. So that's my way to deal with it.
Don't you find that? Yeah, sorry. Don't you find that sometimes it's really difficult sometimes for us to do those things though, because we have that urge to be, right, or the bigger person, or
It used to be a lot harder for me, but then I don't know what changed for me. I think just what happened was I know part of it. Part of it is because of my own journey with learning how to be a deliberate creator with the law of attraction. I realized I needed to get myself into a happy place and try to stay there as much as I could. And I realized that getting into a tussle with somebody on a highway was probably not conducive to that. So I said, okay, well, if that's not conducive, I'm going to do an entirely different thing. And so I just changed the strategy entirely. And as a result, the really funny thing is I don't really find many of those drivers anymore, which is another law of attraction thing, but they just don't really show up very often.
And that concept that you talk about, that at least I feel is so relevant here. It is, it's not as easy as it sounds. Everybody's listening to say, oh yeah, they can just simply do that. But I look for identifiers, and if I'm holding on to the steering wheel really hard with both hands, and if I'm tensed up, that's the emotion that I'm putting out there. I need to identify what is that about. If I'm worried about this guy getting in front of me, oh, you're not going to cut me off. I've waited in line here. Take a deep breath and say, what does all this really matter? So I need to identify. I still fight it sometimes, especially when, you have life going on. I'm a stickler for being on time. 5 minutes early is 5 minutes late is almost my mantra. And so when I'm going to meet a client, or I have an appointment, I get that infringes on me being on time when somebody's. So I find myself at that point. Yesterday I was doing that radio show we talked about, and I had to be there no later than 9 o'clock. So again, in my world, that's 8:50. So I'm driving. Traffic was rush hour traffic in Richmond, which isn't really bad, but it's for about 20 minutes. It's really bad each 2 times a day. And I was stopped for a second, and I started to say, calm down. Let it go. Getting in a wreck will make me miss the show. In reality, I'm still going to be there plenty of time, and I'm able to process that. And then I'm not putting out there that stress, because that stress is just like you're saying, Walt, that law of attraction picks up on the emotion, not anything else. And so the emotion of the stress, and whether we're dealing with our kids, you're dealing with traffic, when you can de-escalate your emotion and get it to a place of particularly with your kids, whether it's, the emotion of love and caring and extreme, that extreme joy. I use joy a lot when I use joy in my grieving process with my son TJ. And it's the way that I am able to say, that's how I deal with his losses, with joy. So I find these emotions that override the negative side of things, or the things that are debilitating to me. So that's the emotion that I replace it with. So whether it's driving, dealing with my kid, dealing with grief, those emotions are interchangeable. And when you have that power to do exactly what we're talking about, that's how you're using the law of attraction to your advantage.
And you talk about emotion, and that something just came to me in regards to our children. And what I feel is that they pick up the emotional stress of the parent. They're little sponges of emotion, and sometimes I feel that Megan, for example, part of her stress could have been from myself and John, even over her teenage years, us stressing about business or anything that was happening in our life, and not really understanding how that works. And it's all about the law of attraction and what we are putting out. Because I know I'm myself of just getting better on making sure that I'm happy or how my thoughts are. But back when she was in 16, it was a lot of work. So part of her issues could have been just from us being in a stress mode. So it's I think being more aware of our own thoughts, then that translates into like even a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old, because they're picking those up, right? Unknowingly.
Oh. Well, one of the things that it matches exactly what you're saying is I was when my son Chris and I were in a car one time, and he was probably about 10 years old, and he is a very fearful child, a lot of stress, and so I always try to not let him pick up on any, and I don't do a lot of stress anymore, but I mean, everybody does at some point. But we were in Florida, and those of you that drive through Florida thunderstorms at times, and you can have a mini hurricane on any given day. And so we were near Orlando. We had just left Disney World, and we were in a torrential downpour. I mean, the full blast windshield wipers, 70-mile-an-hour winds. It was hard to keep the car on the road, and you can't pull over. There's just nowhere to pull over. So I had both hands on the wheel. I'm leaning forward, and I mean, I was hyper-focused and hyper-stressed. And I didn't say a word, but Chris asked me, he said, "Dad, are we going to be okay?"
Wow.
And I'm like, "What are you talking about, buddy?"
Yeah.
And he said, You're really scared." I said, "Buddy, I'm not scared." I said, "We're fine." And I put one hand on the steering wheel, leaned back, and he just sort of like, okay. He was able to turn, he had turned down the radio, and I turned down the radio, actually, how you turn the radio so you can see better. I know that makes no sense. I was doing that. So I was giving all those signals. So exactly what you're saying, our kids, and I think the younger they are, is they pick up on that. I have scenario. My mom, had recently passed away, is outstanding lady, but she grew up. Her entire life was built on fear. I mean, she was fearful and anxious about everything, and I would find myself even as an adult, after about 20 minutes of talking with her, just finding, oh my gosh, what am I anxious? I mean, her energy was so fearful and so anxious. So I had to learn that I had to I couldn't change her energy, but I could not allow her energy to attach to me. And it's the same thing that our kids, when they're little, what we put out there is so much more real than what we tell them. And I do believe that they're picking up on your stress. And then the more you stress and respond to them, the more they pick up on the stress and the response. So when you keep stress out of the response, it is a lot easier. Now, again, a lot easier to do than actually implement at times, right?
Exactly. That's what it's not easy. But what I find is it's the awareness. Once you become aware, then you can be more choosy on how your thoughts are, and really, if we look at that whole thing, why are we stressed? Like, can we really do anything about it? So it just actually filters up as well. We just become better people, and we resonate at a higher level ourselves.
One thing
that's the key. Go ahead, Walt.
I was just going to say, one thing that my wife has mentioned on a number of occasions to me is the point that you cannot experience stress while also simultaneously breathing deeply. And I try to remember that. So whenever I'm in a stress situation, that I don't impact myself, and so that I don't impact others around me, I try to remember, oh yeah, breathe, 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 breathe. And when I do that, it's amazing how quickly I can get the situation back under my own control.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And you can't,
that's so
you
true.
can't be stressed either and in love, right? You can't have love and
Right.
fear at the same time.
Yeah, and I've always used I use this all the time with, to me, I haven't really got into that too much, whether or not it's the same emotion for everybody or different emotions apply differently, but to different people. But for me, a state of sincere gratitude blocks depression, anxiety, anything. It's, to me, when I'm living in real gratitude, just getting that mindset, that to me is the overriding factor for anything. It is my sort of my power source. Gratitude, boom, there goes the stress. There goes. I can't be truly grateful and depressed. I can't be truly grateful and anxious. I mean, those two things. Anxious is to me a fear of lack or fear of danger. Where being grateful is, wow, look at all of this. Look at my life. Look at the blessings. I mean, so finding that ability to switch to whatever your version. I know Walt is a huge proponent, and I've watched him successfully use this. When he needs a lift or needs to get out of situations, humor is a big. You love to watch funny shows or listen to comedies.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing. I mean, I try to let my inner Robin Williams emerge because that's when the best stuff happens for turning things around, I can tell you.
And do you find, what I found as well is empowering Megan to journal. So when you're saying gratitude, is I said to her, well, just write out 3 things that you're grateful for in the day. One of my friends is, she's got a movement of, she calls them joy journals, and she's a psychologist, social worker at one of the high schools, and she's doing great things with the teenage, population there. And when they come into her office, she's getting just a notepad, it's 3-ring notepad, and getting colorful crayon or markers and stickers and writing out what you're joyful in your life, even though there's deep despair in some of them. She tells me some of the stories, of course, no names or anything, but, but writing out just what one thing is you're joyful for today. It could be maybe they had a great lunch or something, and writing it out. And the more you get writing out joy and gratitude, it helps shift things.
Absolutely. And journaling, one of the techniques that I use, I'd have people, I said, we're going to write your book. I want you to write your book. And most people listen to that and they're like, what? I mean, literally, it's a form of journaling where you tell your story. And they're like, well, where do I start? No, we'll start now, go backwards, start in the beginning, go forward. Don't care where you start. Just write your book. And journaling is a way to help identify emotions and to be able to shift or identify situations, because, we're not what happened to us, but we are, and I know this isn't necessarily politically correct with therapy thought today, but I think we have a tendency to sort of reinforce trauma in not a way of recovery, but almost a way of wallowing in it. And it's sort of shifted in therapy along the way that, let's spend 12 years in therapy, just over talking the trauma. Not that trauma is not a huge significant event. It is. But processing trauma and moving on is a tool that I find more powerful than almost owning the trauma, because it's a really a rough place to live when you are your trauma. And that's why journaling, I do think the gratitude and being able to, I've done 5 things I'm grateful for every morning for the last 23 years now, and never missed a day. And so I find it very powerful.
That raises an interesting question, because Wendy Dillard, my co-host for the afternoon podcast, raised this one. I think it was yesterday, actually. She said that she can't go back and look at her journals from the past because she wrote in them so much stuff that was going on at the time that was not her good stuff, and she doesn't want to read it because she doesn't want to re-energize that in her life. So I'm wondering, doesn't that kind of indicate the journaling needs to be as positive as you can make it, because you're really kind of trying to rewrite your story in a way that actually serves you rather than just dumping stuff?
Right, and that you find that a lot, because obviously my journaling that took place, 23 years ago was not near as positive as what's taking place now. It's a much different life. I'm a much different person. But one of the techniques, it's funny you mentioned that, one of the techniques that a therapist, law of attraction practitioner uses that I've incorporated as well, this is not my original idea, but like Wendy's talking about, is he recommends going back and reading that and then literally rewriting it. Okay. Read the traumas, read where you're at, and then say, okay, let me redo my story from a different perspective. And he finds that a really effective tool for a lot of people, to see it, not re-traumatize it, not giving it power, but rewriting it, literally rewriting your past.
That's an interesting concept, yeah. And when it's a tough one, really, because when you're trying to rewrite your past, you're basically trying to convince yourself that the story was different from what you remember. And that could be quite a challenge.
Well, and I use, not to be redundant, but I use the example of in the middle of my addiction, having experienced quite a traumatic event, many traumatic events, but one traumatic event in particular, that there is no way that I could ever imagine it being positive. However, that event years later became a pivotal point in my life in my connection with my son TJ. So the event, it isn't about rewriting the event as how it happened. It's about rewriting your perspective of what happened. And that does, I turned that trauma into a really a positive event after all these years. So it is about reassigning it. You can't, using, I don't like to use the negative terms, but you can't take some negative childhood event and ever make it a positive, but you can see where that negative childhood event made you more resilient. I see where this made this happen. I see where that it doesn't work for everyone, but it can be a very effective tool.
Wow, yeah. And while journaling in itself can help with the law of attraction as well, like what put out there, right, what you see having.
Sure,
with getting to the teenagers like Megan, it was November 2016, and she says, Mom, I'm really tired of hanging out with the same people. They're not moving forward. And I said, well, start journaling, start writing out exactly what you want. You want to meet a guy, she started, and she listened to me. I walked by her room about a week later. I said, oh, what, you're writing it in a journal? She said, yeah, I thought I'd try it because it worked for Chantel. Chantel met her actually now husband that way. And I said, well, just write out exactly what you want. Well, that was November. In January, she had to do a volunteer for massage at there's a velodrome, which is cycling, where they had the Pan Am Games here in Toronto. And she was at the event, and she massaged one of the athletes, and Sydney asked her out, and aren't they now living together and a really happy relationship? So it's so powerful, journaling and writing out exactly what you see having as well.
Well, it's how my wife and I met, because my wife did the same thing. She actually, as part of one of her classes, my wife was also formerly a psychotherapist, and in one of her classes when she was getting her master's degree, she was asked to write out about, what her ideal mate would be. And so she wrote all this out, and then many years later she meets me and she pulls the list out, and I'm like stunned at how close my qualities were to what she had on the list. It was mind blowing. So it really does work.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a vision board written. It's that idea of, we get to write. We're in charge of our history. Walt, you and I have talked about. I was fascinated years ago, or I think it was last year before. A friend of mine, I have a lot of friends in Russia, and I got hold of a Russian middle school world history book. And it was interesting. It was in English. They had translated English, and Russian history doesn't really remotely match American history.
Oh, right.
You can tell they're describing the same thing, but the outcomes are much different. World War II being the biggest point, Russia mentions us briefly as a minor helpful force, but they won World War II in their version, and we won World War II in our version. And they get to write their own history. We get to write our own history. It's so much about is my life a series of traumas that have defeated me, or is my life a bunch of strengthening events that I've overcome and made me more resilient? The answer is yes. It's which one I choose to look at. And that's what journaling gives you the chance to write your own story.
Yeah, I've often thought that the word history also needs to have a pair of words, history and her story, because that's really what it is. It's two different kinds of stories.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Yeah. That's the key.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, actually a little bit less than 5, about 4 minutes left. I wanted to touch on a couple things here. First, I wanted to remind people about subscribing, and also wanted to give people clues about how to subscribe. If you have not yet subscribed to the podcast, easiest way to do it is by going to the website, loatoday.net. There are buttons there for subscribing. Also, you can do it on your iPhone by going to the iTunes store and searching on LOA Today, or you can even do it with the built-in podcast software. Same thing, just do a search on LOA Today. If you have an Android phone, such as a Motorola or a Samsung or a Nokia or one of the other phones that use the Android operating system, you need to have software installed. It doesn't normally come with a podcast software, but you can do that just by going to the Play Store. Just download like Podcast Manager, which is a free app that you can install. And then once you have that installed, then you can do a search. But make sure you do it, because the people who are who are subscribing to the podcast are really getting value. We know that on average, the average listener listens to 22 to 25 podcasts a month. So we know that it's making a big difference in people's lives. So let it make a big difference in your life too. And before we leave you, Stacey, I know you got a lot of stuff going on. Do you want to take a minute to talk about, maybe one piece of what you're doing and let people know who might be interested?
Oh, sure. So what I am actually helping people be the best they can be in how they dress, looking at, that first impression. I'm actually targeting, I'm going to be working with mostly men. My background in the whole fashion world, or my whole background was in retail, was in men's clothing, and that's the way I'm through that too, because of my history in what I've done personally. I have a lot of I have my NLP certification, so there's a lot of coaching that will go with that as well. So yeah, I look forward to working with all kinds of people and helping them dress.
If somebody wants some help with that kind of thing, how can they reach you?
Right now, they can reach me. My website is just not launched yet, but they can reach me on my current website with the financial planning. I do work with my husband, which is Path to Wealth, PATH2 WEALPH.ca, and they can reach me there. They can reach me through Facebook. I've got they can touch base on Stacey Aarssen on Facebook or LinkedIn as well. I'm on LinkedIn. So those are two areas.
All right, very good. And Joel, we don't really normally give you the opportunity, but we should do it today. I mean, if somebody wants to get some personal coaching, how can they get a hold of you?
My website is joelelston.com. I'm on Facebook. Those are usually how most people get hold of me. My number's on my website, so it's probably the best way to do it. It's been a really good show. I really appreciate the opportunity today. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Stacey, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective and your stories. I mean, your stories are the kind that will resonate with any parent for sure, and even people who are just trying to apply LOA in their own lives. It can be a challenge sometimes. Sometimes you gotta kind of take a step back and take a breath and just start pouring out the love instead. So thank you for sharing that perspective.
Thanks for the invitation.
We're glad to have you. And Joel, look forward to talking to you next week.
All right, Walt. Good to see you, buddy. Good to talk to you, buddy.
Okay, we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.